joint practices with the Minnesota Vikings. We have a guy straight from the scene, the one and only David Liechty, here with us to break it all down. Stay tuned for the full coverage.
Let's go get him. Let's go get him today, man. Let's go. Hey, dominate on 3. 1, 2, 3. Dominate.
What's going on, guys? I'm back here with another episode of the RedZone podcast. Marco is back today, and we've got a special guest, like I mentioned, in David Liechty. David, how are you doing tonight, man?
Good. I'm doing great. And it's Liechty.
But Liechty? Is it Liechty?
No. Yeah.
There we go.
It's okay.
I switch off so much because I remember in the space I said Liechty. Now I'm saying Liechty. There we go. David Liechty.
Hey, thank you for joining us, David. Appreciate you. One of my guys. I'll be on today, but on a very limited capacity. Still a little stuffed nose and stuff like that. So I will be chiming in, but not too much because I don't want you guys to be here and sniffling the whole time.
We good. And David, before we kind of start, just tell us, how's the overall experience over there with the Minnesota kind of practices?
Yeah, it was cool. Standpoint, it was structured like you'd see at Santa Clara for the Niners. I mean, you cruise. Then they went to these. They'd have just team specific coaches working with 49ers players and vice versa for the Vikings. Then you'd start doing one-on-one some drills with on occasion some reps with inter-Niners. Then they transitioned to 7-on-7s, and then they went to 11-on-11s. And of course, the Vikings actually are parallel to each other. They use about 3 of them. Third more for special teams who that were closest to the stands and the media, and they'd obviously have the when it got to 11 was the Vikings ones on O going against the Viking Niners ones on D, and then pretty slick. But then from the fan experience, really enjoyable. I went yesterday. I was there with Sanchez, and then today the same thing. But I took my two kids, and then 2 of my. They were able to go and get away from Dad while I was doing work, and they were having mini golf, and you could buy coffee and adult beverages. You got a full range of concessions. You could buy Vikings jerseys. And the space is just wide views that are inside and outside that are absolutely gorgeous with stadium seating. And they just, everything there was, from their staff, the parking, everything was like honestly top notch, super organized, really, really organization, to be quite honest. So yeah, it was
what Viking player jersey did you buy? You're saying you were able to buy jerseys. What jersey did you buy? Because we all know you're a Vikings fan.
Yeah, I'm a Vikings. I'm a trading as a 49ers fan. I bought the old Ahmad Rashad jersey actually from the inside the NBA host, and then Jared Allen jersey. That was something that was really wanting to add to my ensemble.
Jared Allen's a good one. Jared Allen, definitely one of the better ones. And we see a question here from 49ers Throwback. So I think that's a great place to start. We'll step away from the Trey Lance talk, obviously, to begin. Let's talk about the biggest kind of storyline over the last 2 days. Offensive line, defensive line, the trenches. The 49ers and Vikings offensive line seem to have struggled over the last 2 days. Can you give us a little more insight on what you thought about the 49ers offensive line in the last 2 practices?
Yeah, here's another little pro tip from training camp there, just to kind of give you a flavor of what it's like. I went there without the credential, so I was in the stands and took the highest row up to get a view as I could, which was the right way to go. I was on Grant's show today. I'm talking with Grant and the other guys that were in the media. They actually have the Vikings have them, the one thing they don't get right is they put their media in and only one of the end zones, not both, were the field. So like there's one field where the media were literally the kid, and I thought that was strange. So for me, the second field plays kind of writ large, but getting really, really, really close look at the offensive line is the thing to do. But what's something that did become a common right tackle continued to get worked. Whether it was Colton McKivitz, and it was a problem. There were several consecutive plays, and you had the Niners being Trey Lance taking sacks, and it wasn't because Trey Lance was holding the ball too long or being indecisive or being something like that. It would, and to be quite honest, it's honestly a credit to him that he only had 2 days, and that was an interception today. It was a contested catch ball, but it didn't happen. And so that's something that's going to be a point of consternation or a point of concern as we go forward into the is how isn't it Mike McGlinchey coming back? Who's going to be the answer at right tackle? It's a liability with Colton McKivitz and Justin School. It's very clear.
Yeah. And real quick, before I ask my next question, want to give a quick shout out, not only to David, David Liechty, that is, not only for him for tuning in today and giving us this insightful training camp report, but also to the person who made today's thumbnail, Steve Mullen. You can check out his links in the description, S. Mullen Jr., both on Instagram and Twitter. Makes a great ton of great graphics. If you ever want a graphic, be sure to hit him up. Definitely did me a favor there. So go ahead and check out his stuff because it's great stuff. And if you want a graphic, go ahead and hit him up. But David, continuing on, you talk about the offensive line, specifically about the right tackle. Was there another position to you that kind of struggled on the offensive line, or do you think the primary struggles really came from that inconsistency at right tackle? And I understand it's practice, so you obviously take it in a way with a grain of salt.
Yeah, I don't want to. That's the thing. And not coming from a side. I think that Spencer Burford is some things that you saw in the game.
Future Pro Bowler. I agree. Future Pro Bowler.
Yeah, absolutely. Marco actually is a 2022 Pro Bowler. Actually, at all positions, he's going to be time where he gets right tackle, right guard, gets reps at the center, and is so phenomenal early to get votes in all positions. The thing is that Spencer Burford is still learning too. Like not all pass reps are perfect. You don't expect that, but that right side. So, Jake Rendell at center is not going to be a top 15, top 10 center, but he's fairly reliable. He's going to have his ups and downs. Kyle's worked with situations that have been, but I will say this: it is really primarily at right tackle, and Kyle's going to have to work overtime, and he's capable of it, but Kyle has the quiver to work with to kind of pull out his bag of magic. We'll talk more about that later. But it is going to hamstring if that continues to be a liability. And so that's where I really hope Mike McGlinchey is able, and I hope that's not something that he sustains a lot longer. I think the team is not thinking it goes that much. Now you have Jordan Mills. Didn't get really much runs with the ones. I think it's a desperate. You could say it's a desperate move, but I don't think it would be imprudent and just see what he can do, because right now, Colton McKivitz, Bless is just not getting it done.
So from a scale of 1 to 10, David, from a scale of 1 to 10, what's your worry meter on the offensive line if it's only the right tackle position? Because last year we had Tom Compton running at right tackle, and they still went to the NFC Championship game. So if you had to put a 1 through 10 on a worry meter, what would it be?
So here's how I'm gonna the caveat on this. Directly answer this a little bit because I'm a social studies teacher, and and this is what I do. But Brandon Ayuk had a quote today in an interview about how he was said, and part of that was because the offensive install is so vanilla right now. A single snap in 7s or 11s, the last 2 days, like I talked about. There was no misdirection, nothing that was setting up something else down the line. Here's move the ball situation. Sometimes they'd even go like second down, repeat like 2 times and on again. It's like it wasn't. It seemed like Kevin O'Connell and Kyle probably got together and said, "Do this, and we're not worried about X." My point in that is know that Kyle is capable of coaching around that. Like you said, Marco, we got Tom Compton another contract. Like he was able to do that and operated with Justin School and Daniel Brunskill as guys are rotating at swing tackle, and that's no knock on those guys. It's just they're not. You're not the caliber of players you'd think are going to go to the league reliably necessarily, and so I do think that once Kyle healthy, stable of Debo, Ayuk, Kittle, you got your running backs, you have there's a lot they can do to mask that, and we haven't seen Kyle is so successful with be able to kind of alleviate some of the pressure on some of those past pro reps at right tackle is no bueno, and I work around it. It doesn't always have to be perfect, but you'd like to see it tighten up. So yeah, my answer 1 to 10. I'm going to go 7 because I'm not panicking, but it was enough where I was turning to Brad, I was talking to Grant, and I was like, this is where it was like sack. And that's not against the Packers. You saw the situation where right before they played Danny Gray, you're dealing, you're in the turnstile. And if that's going to be something that becomes too commonplace, where you keep your quarterback healthy, and if Trey goes down, like that's not, what are we doing here?
Real quick, answering a question from Mark here. You talked about the right tackle. You talked about how Colton McKivitz, Justin Skule have struggled, potentially sliding Jordan Mills to position. If McGlinchey were to not be healthy for week 1, who would you personally trot out at right tackle?
Mark on this too. Like right now, honestly, I have no problem. I think you need to see what notice with Kyle over the years is, and I'm not saying that would be like, I'm not saying like that's what 5 months ago, right? I'm saying like this idea that Kyle has shown that you have ones in camp, and all of a sudden you're logging huge minutes in the regular season. Yeah. Everybody thought Darqueze Dennard was going to, and I say everybody, and I'm not. People can have their
not
I'm
everyone.
not saying you. I know.
Not us.
Not you.
No,
not you, and I ain't there either. But like, there's this idea like, oh, here's the veteran. Oh, he's getting all this run at one. That Kyle. I think Kyle has shown that he doesn't necessarily play roster politics in that regard, or draft slot politics. It's too late for Jordan Mills to work in there. If they've run with swing tackles in the past to acclimate, and all of a sudden they're baptized by fire on a Super. And this year and look, I'm going to be honest. This year they do believe they're contending for a Super Bowl. They don't think that they're not a contender for the 1 seed or a team that can push to go to the Super Bowl. That's very strongly that. So, yeah, 7's where I'm at, and if I were to do there, because right now we've seen what Colton McKivitz has offered this team. We've seen Justin. Jalen Moore went down, a guy that had utility, interior or on tackle, but you don't have guys that are just sitting out there in free agency, right? Like that are just sitting on the couch available. People have asked about that. 2 positions that are really hard to do that at, and right now, even though I show very word to email fine, they've been gone too. And so you got these real premium been looked a little dicey lately, but I think McGlinchey's going to come back. I think, and Emmanuel Mosley, they're going to be fine. And I think week 1, you're going to see a team that's mostly healthy.
Yeah, I think your point about Jordan Mills is very valid. Me and Marco have talked about it before, and even on Twitter, you've seen it where Jordan Mills right now, while he might not be the best scheme fit because he's not he's not the fastest guy, he's not a guy who necessarily moves as well as other linemen on the team. He's stout in pass protection compared to the remainder of the roster, especially if you're talking about backup level right tackles like Justin Skule, and that's where he can fit in. And so, with Spencer Burford continuing to work in the passing game while also being a run mauler right now, he could be a good fit right now next to Spencer Burford. So, wouldn't mind that for sure. Moving on from the offensive line, because it seems like that center position now is going to Jake Rendell. Moving on from the offensive line, let's flip it to the other side of the trenches. What did you see from the defensive line, and were they as dominant as you expected?
Yes, and I was hosting a space this afternoon. Grant and I did a couple shows the last 2 days, and I forget what I've said explicitly. You expect the beat writers or people like me that are at camp, you expect us to say best player on the field when he's on the field. And what was very encouraging is that that remained Nick Bosa. And so it seems like, you get coach speak like, oh, Nick Bosa's so good. Like unique analysis, right? Nick Bosa was unbelievable. Like he was, and he always looks fit, but it's like he's at a different level. He is zoned in. Nick Bosa is always a reserved guy. He says in front of a microphone. You might see him celebrate a little bit, but he's usually like, he's in the zone. He's on a different level. Honestly saying it that like nobody wants to go up against Nick Bosa. There were times today. I said, how many sacks is that? Like we stopped counting, like because with the 49ers run offense, and this isn't a homer take. It just was interesting how they blew the defensive players can't hit the quarterbacks in the 11-on-11s. The Niners had the black jerseys, Vikings had red jerseys on. You can't hit the QBs, but it's on Trey dead right away, and some of those sacks he probably could have evaded. They still blew him dead. On the Vikings side, for whatever reason, more often than not, they did the sacks, but then they let it play on. And I don't know if that was Kevin O'Connell and just kind of the officials about, but Bosa was so regularly backed after a cleanups, like it was just quick. Like there were times where it looked like the line was barely set. It was like it was too easy. And so coupled with was taking double teams almost every single play. A couple chip, and he was pushing the pocket routinely. Didn't have any sacks credited. He gets one. If he does that, if he stays healthy, and he routinely if he's playing, he's not always going to be that 3-down guy. But like if he's in the lion's share of snaps and he's eating those blockers, Nick Bosa is going to. It's going to happen. You can go to Vegas and put your money down.
And it could be too that the fact that like they're letting the Vikings continue to play because Kyle Shanahan would probably tell Kevin O'Connell, "Hey, what I usually do is I don't even practice Nick Bosa, but these 2 days I want Nick Bosa to get good reps against your tackles. So He is going to wreck your offensive line, and when he does so, just allow your guys' offensive guys to keep playing because that's something that the 49ers do when Nick Bosa is wrecking havoc. But I did notice the 49ers stopped practicing Nick Bosa during practice, live team drills, to allow their offense to actually get going. So that's something that's very interesting that it allowed them to keep going during the practice.
No, and I think that's the thing and that's a great point, Marco. And I did notice he's not going to sit there and be always on one side or the other. And I have to look at his stats. In camp, he more often than not was at left end. And which, again, Vikings is not a bad tackle. Christian Darrisaw is a very good and he was given, and they've got Derek, and they've got O'Neal at right, and he really was giving O'Neal fits. And so that's a pretty decent tackle tandem, one of the best young tackle tandems in the NFL, and it was encouraging. So it wasn't just Bosa though. You had guys. Evcam was playing well. Kamoko Toure, another ones on occasion he was. So you do temper that a little bit, but production is production, and he's consistently done it in camp. However, I do think level of competition does need to be known against 2s and 3s. It just is. So I'm not expecting Kamoko Toure to come in and be like some Pro Bowl reserve or anything like that. But he's going to be able to come in and give them good snaps and better than he's given credit for. Oftentimes, if everybody thinks of him as this freaky athlete, situational rushers. So front seven was beasting, and to go along with that defensive line, all along the interior, Hassan Ridgeway, I think people have forgot about. Played some really good ball. It's going to be good. There's going to be several good football players.
I do want to talk
really good football.
Real quick before you get to Hassan Ridgeway, since we're talking about Bosa, I do want to talk about this comment. So Nick, there is a couple videos out there of Nick Bosa being essentially held by the Vikings offensive lineman, but I'm going to go in and say they weren't holds. So if Nick Bosa ever does a rip move, the offensive line has all rights to hook him across the shoulder pads under the neck area where it looks like they're holding him. But if you do any rip move, the offensive lineman can hold you in that kind of way. It's their way of hooking you and allowing you to hold a defensive lineman if they do a rip move.
Yep. And that, the Niners complain about it. Maybe there's some gray area that needs to be revisited, but until that gets gone, they have letter of the law rules, and it's just too bad, so sad. And I totally understand we're fans, but then it's and you brought it up. I know some other people have brought it up as well, and I'm glad it's instead of sitting here hemming and hawing, gnashing our teeth, and it's a great comment, by the way. I wasn't trying. It's not everything that you see as a hold is a hold. Now, you want, but Nick's creative enough and Nick's good enough where he knows it's going to happen. So he's still going to get hit.
You talk about the defensive line. That's obviously the biggest portion of this 49ers roster. Let's move back to one of the more injured groups. Let's talk about the secondary. First, before the negative, because obviously there's both sides, let's talk about the positive. Quantrez Knight, caught an interception today. What did you see from him over the last 2 days? And then talk about the negative as well, and really how this group has fared against a tough receiver duo in Jefferson and Thielen without their top two cornerbacks.
Before you go real quick, David. So I do also have the Seattle Bears game in the background for myself, watching it while we stream right now. And Jesus Christ, with how bad Geno Smith is playing and how bad he actually looks, there's a good chance we could get a pretty decent pick from Seattle if we really wanted to. Oh my God, they're terrible. We are going to start the season 2-0 and walk all over both of these teams. It is ridiculous.
I really believe that and I'm not saying, but I really strongly believe that the Bears and the Seahawks might be the two. I really do. And I no disrespect to Justin Fields, no disrespect, but their offensive, their defense it's not as good as some Bears fans think it is. I mean, Darnell Mooney, I like that kid, and Cole Kmet is underrated, but that it honestly, I hope for the Seahawks. I don't wish. I think if Pete Carroll and Schneider are doing it right, they wouldn't get a pick. I really feel strongly they're in staunch contention for the number one pick, and they need a quarterback. It's not great. Going back to the question on the secondary, though, Quantrez Knight, local kid, I think has looked good, but again, the caveat is you're not really, you know what I mean? And I think he's, I don't, maybe Marco or you, Rohan, have some information that I don't see the squad guy and a guy that you can develop. So that's positive. Being on the practice squad in the NFL is not necessarily issue. The guy who I keep talking about, though, and I know it's almost become over this last film, everybody's saying it, and they should. Samuel Womack, honestly, had every in training camp against the Vikings, not even close. Not even close. And he's just, I mean, what I've been noticing is everybody's like, oh, he's a slot corner, and he is. He has the ability outside as well. He has the ability to go, and it's just amazing. And I think there was, I saw varied scouting reports about him, and I didn't see a lot way under the radar. But then the ones that I dug up, there were certain people, everybody sees something different sometimes. This competition is like a guy who actually is, hips are a lot looser than he'd been. We already knew he was fast and quick, but his reaction time is ridiculous. He's confident, and he's there. He's sticky. He sticks in the hips. I mean, he's a rend. The Niners needed this. They, with K1 in Denver, hit on this, and it's a huge win for the 49ers scouting department and Adam Peters. I am ecstatic about that. Aside from that,
did you just give Adam Peters credit for John Lynch's pick?
I did. You can backcountry fam. David Liechty has said that Adam Peters, the brains and the brawn in the scouting department. Can I say that?
I mean, I don't disagree, but I thought it was kind of funny that you're like, yeah, shout out to Adam Peters for Samuel Womack when the general manager is actually John Lynch.
Oh, I forgot. Sorry. The assistant vice principal of personnel, Adam Peters. Anyway, John, good pick, buddy. Yeah, Samuel Womack. I'm all in on Samuel Womack. He's going to start. He's going to do really, really well. He's going to end up being, I really firmly believe from what I've seen, this kid is the real Marco. You guys think that too. And I know there's some other people I really trust a lot who are alone. I know the coaching staff really loves him. And he's going to be there. So Ambry Thomas in reps and drills had a couple moments that look good, pretty bad. For every, it's one thing to like have like a one celebrate, but then when you've got two or three more where you're holding people and having penalties nonstop, it's I don't know.
My question is though, David, because I know all teams they run training camp very differently. Rohan, stop clicking on them. I'm bringing you in. All right, you're in. So I know a lot of teams like they run training camp or practice and stuff like that very differently. They actually have their refs on site actually call every flag or throw every flag. Where they actually throw in flags on like Ambry Thomas when he's holding or like any of the defensive backs when they're holding or anything like that.
Sometimes, but they were clearly these guys. I'm sorry, and I could be proven wrong. These refs that they brought in that had they were in shorts, by the way. The refs should wear shorts. Why not? It's hot.
It's hot, man. Give them some slack. It's hot.
Stupid. They sure didn't seem like NFL refs. There were a lot of times where some like trainer or coach's kid, that's incomplete, and the officials just kind of like 10 seconds later, like making the call. The officiating at the training camp is like anything great. There were many times where they didn't throw a flag, and I was going back and forth. Eric Crocker today, and I know you even just like did make a PBU, but like he did have he had a fistful of Justin Jefferson a full second. People say, "Oh, that's a hand in his back." Like, that's a hole. It's and Justin Jefferson he had it in his hands, and then Lenoir had the makes a big celebration. I was happy for him, but I was like, Justin Jefferson kind of looked back and he's like, very next end zone dusting him. I mean, that's Justin Jefferson. He might be the best receiver in the game right now. He really might. I just don't think. I think Lenoir and Avery Thomas are guys that can really help complete scrubs, and I would never say that about an NFL player anyway. That's just disrespectful. I believe in those guys. I just feel like they haven't necessarily really shown enough. D'Amico Ryans is really trusting them with a lot of reps, and it's showing when they're with. And I think that Ambry, the refrain that this camp has been, it's just he's all over. He's constantly got his hands. It's not just like you're checking the line. That's legal. He's a penalty. He's going to be a penalty machine when he's out there, and that's what kills you. Completions. You can give up things like that at time of day, but when you're giving up first downs on penalties routinely, it's a killer, especially on third down. And so, and the Niners had a problem with it, by the way, and so I really hope for very forward. I know that they will be. Niners are being cautious because they know what life was like last two starting cornerbacks, and when those guys get back, even with Jimmy Ward out for a little, that'll mask things. At safety, that's the big question. Like, I personally think George Odom is going to be the guy. You guys might disagree with me. From what I saw, I thought he actually had a couple of picks and PBUs. He picked off Kirk Cousins last X, and they tried to get slick and run him out wide, and Odom snuffed it out right away. It's like it was almost like call it a telegraph isn't completely fair. I just thought Odom made a really good read on the ball and it made it look easy so well. He's a veteran. He filled in very well last year as a starter for the Colts. I would feel the most comfortable with going opposite Talanoa Hufanga.
Now that you're talking safety, how did Hufanga look? How did Tarvarius Moore look? But most importantly, there's a rookie on the 49ers roster that I'm very interested in. How did Taylor Hawkins? How did he
Hawkins, look? Yeah.
I will say this. I thought Taylor Hawkins, he's a rookie, and is that he flashed, and his flashes, the ups and the lows were low.
There's no way. There's no way he could flash. I was told by Leona O'Neal that as an undrafted free agent, you can't flash. So that's what he told Rohan. So I don't know how Taylor Hawkins is flashing, but Leona O'Neal couldn't. Like that to me doesn't make sense. So that's why I'm very curious that you're saying this right now.
Rest in peace, Leona O'Neal's tenure with the 49ers. But he was going to make it because he was Taylor Hawkins is a guy that I kind of but yeah, I kind of like him, Now that being said, putting him in there with Hufanga, here's the thing, I like Hufanga. I've said, Marco, you've heard me say this, is that Nick Bosa is the most important. I think Nick Bosa is almost borderline the most important player on the team, the defense. And Fred Warner is an absolute stud. Fred is for linebackers. I still think Jimmy Ward I rank him as second most important on that defense. I think they can mask it now with Ward and Mosley. Charvarius Ward really helps erase and comp what Hufanga is asked to do. Without a player the caliber of Ward, so much ground, it gets a little dicey. There were a couple of plays today where Hufanga just having to cover Justin Jefferson, and like I said, he might be the best receiver in the league, but Hufanga's tasked with stuff like that, it gets a little scary. He got dusted. I mean, he had 5 yards of separation. I mean, it was quick. So that's the things that I worry about. And I'm not saying Hufanga. I think he's asked to do different things in that defense. But since of Jimmy Ward is something I'm looking at. Right tackle and Jimmy Ward. And if the corners are healthy, I think George Odom can come in and fill in admirably and incredibly well on the back end. But I hope that Jimmy isn't out too long, because I think some people are anticipating sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like you said, he's so important just because he's so versatile and he can play a number of different roles. And good report on Hufanga. Let's see who wins that second safety role. David says it might be George Odom as opposed to Tarvarius Moore at the moment. We'll see, because I think both will get to play a good amount on Saturday. Maybe the 49ers don't play Hufanga due to the injury concern. So we'll see. But thank you for that news, David. Let's flip over to the other side. The most important topic of them all to end today's show, Trey Lance. How has Trey Lance looked in the last 2 practices? Because in training camp, Trey Lance was inconsistent. He had good days, he had bad days, and then obviously context was required. But it seems like he's picked up the pace recently, starting with Friday's game, had 1 off practice, I believe, on Sunday, but then Monday's practice and then the last 2 joint practices have heard pretty good remarks, and I want to hear from you. What is your impression of Trey Lance so far?
So much I can say here. I think I'll start with the slightly negative, and in that there were some throws that he's got to take ball placement. Like, his ball placement oftentimes is not as bad as people think it is, but it's like the idea that he might. I don't know if it's getting excited. He's not flustered. He doesn't. That's the thing. He doesn't panic. But there are certain throws that he is incredibly capable of, and sometimes just, whether it's putting too much on it, just doing a little. He got to tighten some of those things up. There were a couple throws in the end zone today in the red zone receiver. And, Tanner Hudson's not going to make the team, but might have been able to make a better effort. But you got to make that. It's got to be a touchdown. There are a couple throws that are just a little bit behind that get a receiver out of rhythm that catches the ball, but those can be drops in the NFL too, because you got to tighten that up. By and large, though, I thought ball placement was good, and it is really good. One thing that I'm striking me is that the press line that they were giving up was routine, and to have what I'm noticing is functional mobility. People were giving Mac Jones his ability to sidestep and evade pressure, even though he wasn't fast. That's exactly what I'm seeing from Trey Lance. Is that everybody thought, strong arm quarterback that can run through people, and all he's going to do is run. He doesn't look. There were a couple of design runs they ran today, and all of them were incredibly successful, which is encouraging. Under pressure, 2 hands on the ball, shoulder dip, evades pressure, sets his feet against the Packers. He does it almost every time. Now, on certain times, once he's gone through his progressions, and if he's going to run and take what's given him, he's going to do it. He had 1 turnover worthy play in 2 days, and it was a pass that wasn't perfect. Ayuk did have his hands on. The back was there, so I can't completely put it on Ayuk at all. But to have that be the only turnover, your receiver had his hands on it, and it wasn't. I'm not gonna. But that's encouraging, and so you're seeing a kid that he reads through progressions. He's making quick decisions. He is looking to push the ball downfield, and all of the sacks that he took, there was not a single sack that I could have charted where it was like, no, held the ball too long. He's taking a Justin Fields, Russell Wilson sack. No, that was just in that situation. One, the officials either blew it dead, or it's just like there's really nothing he could have done. Sometimes everybody says, "Oh, you don't want sacks." Like, well, sometimes it's not your quarterback's fault. Is a hell of a lot better than backward fumbling it into space and having a linebacker have pick six. So I was very, very encouraged with that. And he has a short memory. He makes big plays, and the slight little mistakes he doesn't take to heart. And it's really said over the last 2 practices and Monday too. I think his completion percentage total over those 3 days was somewhere, I think he was like in that 2 to 1 or better than, which if you really go around the NFL, that's kind of what you're looking for. It's like 2.5 to 1. You can do that. You're doing it. And he's going to be, and they haven't even run their install. That's the thing. He doesn't like any of the misdirection, any of the Kyle Shanahan specials. And when that comes into play on Chicago, you're going to see a guy that's going to start getting talked about really, really quick, and the narratives are going to.
And in correlation with Trey Lance, who you said has impressed, while the offensive line has struggled, has the running game at all picked any pace up, or has it also struggled because there hasn't been many holes created by the offensive line?
And on top of that question, a 2-question part, right? Because the run game, if the run game's going, how does the offense look? Does it look very like bland, or is Kyle actually doing stuff? Because I think a lot of fans need to understand during these joint practices, Kyle wasn't doing much. So what did you see from the offense that looked very vanilla?
Said that. I remember when I brought up that I quote, and I was kind of indirectly answering that question about things getting boring. And Ayuk wasn't throwing just like he was like, that's kind of a waste of my time. And he also likes to see the ball. It's fun as a receiver to see the ball, but and that's what I actually had in my notes. It's like, God, this run game can't really get going. And as I realized, like Kyle was honestly like you saw play action and stuff like that, but like and running a naked boot, but like it was honestly like straight up, just you're just simple and nothing crazy, no crazy stunts, like no like, excuse me, that's stunts like no crossers, no misdirection out of like having Debo out of the backfield or anybody else like that. Anything. It was just very vanilla, and that's Kyle's bag, man. It's in the preseason. He's not. He knows what he's going to do. He knows what he can do, and it's also hard to gauge the run game in these 11-on-11s because the defenders, they can't supposed to absolutely light up running backs either, and so I notice almost pass pro reps are easier to grade. I feel because but like in the run grade, the defensive linemen, they're fighting, but then they're like, okay, can I really jack this guy, or can I really make? Yeah. As much as I've always said I like practice reps, I don't know what I feel about the efficacy of joint practices. I thought you learned a lot, but then again, it's still not quite full on football. It's there's a little 2-hand touch, and there were a couple times the Vikings had and to their credit, they aren't idiots, but they're like, 75-yard touchdown run. Well, 2-yard tackle for loss, and they didn't blow it dead. It's just not. I think that's where I liked Ayuk's transparency there. I liked how he was honest, because I like hearing that from players. Like, oh shit, or yeah, I love it. Say it. It gives us a lot of insight, and it really corroborated, I think, some.
And you talked about the Ayuk transparency, right? Like in a way, do you think that what benefits? What's the biggest benefit of the joint practices? Like, because you're talking about the negative kind of portion. If it's still in a way like fake football or 2-hand touch, right, as regular practices are, what do you think the benefit is of that? Do you think there is a change in intensity? Do you think there is some sort of like an increased like added effort because you're facing another team, or do you think it's really just the same as regular practice?
I some of the guys are like, okay, my quarterback can't get hit. I can. And you wonder Williams have a couple reps where it's like, was he? You never question Trent, but like, he had a couple. Even the best players don't always win, right? And so you did wonder, like, if this is a level of intensity. However, I will say this: there were like 3 full-on like 5 that actually seemed to have some punches that were kind of like thrown in there, like Drake and others. Like it was getting chippy for the 49ers defense and the Vikings offense. It didn't with the 49ers O and Vikings D, and that's a byproduct of maybe that's what's fun about this. Fred Warner. I was talking about this in space, talking about this Grant. Fred Warner is like this super polished guy that comes off as just like this GQ dude who's like always just saying the right thing on the field. Like Fred Warner is like trying to get under people's skin. He admits it. You know what I mean? So the sorry, I had to rush my daughter out of here. Get her. The Fred is, and they were doing that today. Dre Greenlaw, Aziz, like every time they were making a play, they were celebrating in their face and trying to get him. The Vikings were getting irritated. Adam Thielen was like looking like a Karen on the sideline. It's like it was wonderful. It's like maybe that's the fun part of it, right? To kind of get their juice, always do. But shit, Fred was getting in fights with Brandon Ayuk in Santa Clara. So it's just, I think it's fun for fans. I think it's fun for. I think you get to see somebody else that's not always your guys that you feel like know you that well, because the intensity is so dialed down and everything's so vanilla. I think it was great insight, and I think a lot of fans, when they hear that, they don't really realize that this is like 10% of what you would see the 49ers putting into their offense. You're just not going to see.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. It like that's why it's still super hard to evaluate practice, even when you have it, have a good idea of it. It's so hard to evaluate it. And with that said, David, I want to thank you so much for coming on, giving us a bit of your mind and what you saw over the last 2 practices, the joint practices. Obviously, the game is this Sunday. It's going to be a fun one, but also a one where it'll be a little harder to evaluate because no Trey Lance, which likely means a good amount of starting players are not going to play. But as I said, David, thank you guys so much for coming on. If you guys like David's content, which he's, I'm sure, going to drop over the entire year as well on Twitter, be sure to follow him on Twitter. It is in the description. He's obviously one of the smarter guys on 49ers Twitter. And like I said, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. As I said earlier, we're going to be posting content, probably something soon too, because the 49ers play the Vikings on Saturday. Marco hopefully gets better, and we will be back. But thank you, David. And
yeah, thank you. Really appreciate you for coming on. His handle on Twitter is Backcountry Fam. You guys can find him right there on Twitter. He also does write for sports. Is it Sports Illustrated? What is it? SF40.
All SI 49ers?
Something like that.
Yeah, he writes for Grant. He does a hell of a job over there. So thank you for coming on. Make sure you guys are subscribed to the channel. Make sure you guys follow everyone on here. And that's it for the day. Thank you.
Yes, sir.